accompanying us. This is our rum expert. And so we're going to be, having a lovely time connecting all the dots, to the award-winning rum that we're going to be tasting at the end. Wingfield is one of the most historically significant sites on the island because it's situated in historic Old World Village, our Old World Town, we like to call it, the town that Sir Thomas Warner and his crew established, the first English town in the Eastern Caribbean. Later, they established Wingfield Estate. He got the first British land grant and went on to become a very wealthy place for many, many years. All the research shows us that rum making started here on this estate as early as 1677, making Wingfield Estate the oldest known site of rum production. This is where everybody should say, ooh. Okay, so again, we're just going to connect the ruins to the rum, the award-winning rum that we have in the tasting experience. And so, hope that we could have a beautiful time learning about, Wingfield's rum heritage and history. This is where freshly cut cane was brought to get all of the juice pressed out. Let's see, Erna. Okay, Erna, could you just take one pace to the right and just do a cane crushing dance like this? Hey, there we go. All right, so right in this location, we had a cane crushing machine. Thank you so much. That's a double shot of rum for you. Okay, so right here was the cane crushing machine. On this wall, just behind Missy, we have a diagram of the cane machine that they used to crush the cane. And we still use this sort of technology today. 3 rollers, you put the cane in, feed roller, top roller, discharge, crushes the cane, and you get a pure, nice cane juice, okay? What we have over in this side is a 19th century sugar refinery. So all of the cane juice was used to make sugar, okay? Now, what's really impressive about Wingfield Estate is that it has the only water-powered mill on the island. And so it gave them a huge advantage. For 6 months of the year, winter or the wet period, there was a lot of rainfall. And so having this aqueduct and an impressive, irrigation network allowed them to convert water into power, for operating this mill. The juice then flowed into the boiling house, okay? We could go a bit further onto this deck. We might have to swap out positions a bit so we could see the boiling house. What we have is the area where they would be boiling the cane juice, converting the juice into a thick syrup and eventually into a wet sugar. The boiling house consists of the boiling wall, and they used a technique called the Jamaican train, originated most likely in Jamaica, which is this. Say again?
I use that a couple times myself.
The Jamaican train. Oh, I got it. But okay, so this allowed them to produce sugar continuously. Okay, it was also genius because it sat on top of a single furnace. So as long as nothing went wrong, they could boil the cane juice in the first copper, manually move it to the second copper, and at that time they could send more juice down into the boiling wall. Okay. So it was a continuous operation. After the juice got to the very last copper, I think this is where we swap our positions. We need some other people to see. Let's rotate. Anyone else need to view the boiling house? No? Okay, so as they transferred the juice, it converted to a syrup and eventually wet sugar. They took this wet sugar and place it into cooling trays to cool down. In this process, they also got molasses, okay, from the cooling process. The molasses would be coming out of the cooling trays and also some left over in the pots after they were, boiling all of this juice. Molasses is the key ingredient for rum making. And so molasses on this estate enable them to produce lots and lots of rum. Yeah. Okay, the good stuff. Attached to the boiling wall, we also have a steam boiler. At one point in time, they were able to produce power using steam to operate some machines over on the other side. Okay, we're not going to visit everything today, but just know that they transitioned from animals to water power, and eventually they had steam on this estate, powering some of the machines. All right, to get this whole system to work efficiently, this huge chimney was installed um, around 1883, allowing them to create a strong draft, helping them to heat the boiler and have all of the smoke being, dumped way up in the air. Just before us, we have the aqueduct built in the 1800s. This allowed them to, channel the water from Wingfield River onto the estate to power the mill. There's a photo here that shows the water wheel that was outside still attached to the aqueduct. So if anybody wants to get a visual, there's a nice photo in front of us. But there was a huge water wheel, 30 feet in diameter, made of all metal, just, attached outside of this building. And so it would be really cool if we still had the water wheel today, right? Unfortunately, because of environmental changes, and we don't have the water flowing across the aqueduct anymore. And so most of the water is diverted down into Wingfield River. We'll get a chance to overlook the river, as we continue to walk around the estate. All right, so on this estate, they had a lot of heavy equipment and machinery, and things would break down, okay? Just in front of us here, before we push forward, there's a boiling pan for boiling the cane juice. You could see this one is broken. And so things would get damaged, things would break on this estate, and they needed a very skilled person who could fix things, okay? So they could keep their production continuous. Most of the work was done on this raised platform. This is where he would be forging the tools and equipment, making repairs, and the firing pit is located, just in front of me, where he would have been sustaining the flame so he could do his operation. Today, we still honor the blacksmith, but this is mostly used for, dancing, like a dance stage. People are taking TikToks and, pictures on this stage right here. But the blacksmith was crucial on this estate. You needed one from day one, because the blacksmith also is the only person who could actually make tools. Karen is the name of the company responsible for making these pans, and it really solidifies St. Kitts to the international trade. These pans, different machinery, even a lot of the bricks came over from the UK. Enslaved people came over from Africa, all to the island to cultivate, sugar, send it back to the UK. We could see that this one is damaged in 2 different locations, and the blacksmith probably was trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Yeah. And so they also were able to get limestone in the process. And so they had a special recipe of adding coral, bits of lime and other bits and bobs from the estate. And there's actually an interesting folklore that suggests adding molasses to the mixture, enabled them to make a water-resistant mortar. And so maybe molasses is one of the reasons why, the aqueducts and the mills and everything is still standing. Okay, in this open space, we have a few crops that we were trying to cultivate symbolically for the crops that, were grown on this estate in the early years. To the left, we have some sugarcane plants. They're not doing really, really well. In front of us, we have a tobacco plant and an indigo plant. The gardener could be fooling me with the indigo because it's still waiting for the bloom. Never seen an indigo plant before. But the tobacco plant, this one has a really cool story in this space. Then when the tobacco started to do a bit better, we would have locals just going, or even tourists going and taking leaves, and drying it and smoking it, because people like to smoke tobacco here on the island. Okay, some people say that this is the largest cotton plant they've seen, but the cotton plant is quite symbolic to the space, because some historians suggest that the cotton plant, along with tobacco and indigo, was cultivated by the indigenous Kalinaga tribe that inhabited this area of the island when the English, came to colonize this island. And so when they when they learned what the indigenous were doing, they decided to follow suit after producing cotton, tobacco, and indigo. Okay, the archaeologist who works on this site discovered features of an indigo pit, And so we know that indigo processing also happened on Wingfield Estate at one point in the past. All right, so we're gonna move from here. We see how they control the flow of water. We'll see how they mastered fire. Essentially, this is the engine room for the boiling house that's upstairs. This entire tunnel was used for storing and transporting bagasse. Bagasse was the leftover from the cane crushing process. And so they didn't use wood or coal. They would use the bagasse. They would recycle it or reuse it as fuel for firing this furnace. These are the main firing entrances where they would feed the bagasse in to heat this system. The system was genius back in the day because they had one main fire that could heat all of the coppers, okay? But if they needed more heat on their particular copper, then they just grab some bagasse and push it into one of their additional firing entrances that are on the inside. This distillery wasn't discovered in 2010, okay? So because of this discovery, that was basically the birth of our company. It's an amazing story. I'll try to share it with you as best as I can. David Rawlinson is the name of the archaeologist who has been working on this site for many years. And after a heavy shower of rain, one day they saw some interesting stones surfacing out of the earth that he didn't see before. And so he got curious. He had a large crew, and so they decided to, start brushing and digging. And, at the end of one day, they started seeing, maybe the shape of a wall. And so they got really invested in, trying to discover what was happening here. And so as the days went by, they started, seeing this circular bits over on this side and more wall structures. And then he got, the aha that this has to be the distillery. What else could it be? And so at the end of the week, they got a digger in to come and move a lot of the dirt. And yeah, that was the Indiana Jones moment. And so we're really proud of the discovery, not only here on the site, but, on the island, that we could finally connect, the history with, an artifact or a ruin. And so this one is really cool, discovered in 2010 by David Rawlinson. That was on the slope. And then they allowed that to flow down into the distillery. Over in the circular bits, they had the copper pots that they could put the fermented mash in, boil it, the alcohol vapor rises over through a gooseneck into the cooling cistern. The cooling cisterns had a constant flow of water going through to cool everything down, okay? The long and short of rum distillation. The decline of rum on this estate is linked to the decline in sugar. So as sugar demands went down in the Eastern Caribbean, they had less molasses, less rum, okay? And as labor costs went up after emancipation, higher costs, less productions and, less rum. And so slowly rum making, stopped or ceased on this estate going into the 1900s, okay? So that's how we lost our rum heritage. And subsequently, after this estate was abandoned, this distillery got buried over, years and years of landslide and, stuff coming down.